So I'm preparing here for a speed painting event where I will have an hour to complete a piece, and I can have the surface prepared with an underpainting, and I can have a sketch on it. But other than that, the piece needs to be created during that hour. So I have a couple different ideas of how I want to proceed with that. And so I've painted two different surfaces, and I'm going to try them both out and see which direction I want to go at that event tonight. So here on these, you may not be able to see it, but I've sketched out a floral still life, and here I've also sketched out a floral still life. This one will be about painting the negative spaces, and this one will be about basically about finger painting the piece. So I'm going to do them both and see which one I think will work best at the event.
I'm using matte acrylic paint on both of these primarily. This is some by Holbein. I really like it. It is, I'm mainly choosing it for the color here. I sold a piece recently that I really loved, and so I'm kind of in my mind trying to replicate that just a little bit. It'll be different, but it's a similar color scheme. So I've got my palette ready, my water, my brush, everything's ready. So I'm just going to go ahead and set the timer for an hour and see how I come along on this. Painting negative spaces is really one of my favorite things to do, and I love doing this kind of work where the collage papers kind of become the element then, and I paint the background around the shapes. And I find it very relaxing and very fun to do. I am going to try to really keep moving here though, because an hour is not terribly long to be creating a painting. I'm not going to show you the whole hour that I spent on this piece because that would obviously take a lot of time, but I am showing some segments here as I work, and it is really fun to see the image starting to take place as you paint in those negative spaces. And so I think it's kind of fun to watch the process of this. You can watch the clock and get an idea of how much gets done in 10 minutes. It's obviously a little bit slow going to do this. So we will have to see if I can get the piece done in an hour's time. These jumps are about 10-minute increments, so it's pretty fun to see how much you can actually get done in 10 minutes. People often ask me how long it takes me to complete a piece of art, and the answer's a little complicated because like this piece, technically I'm spending an hour on it. However, there's a lot of hours and hours and hours of learning and experimenting and preparing and everything to get to the point where I can create this piece. So this is a piece where I've already developed the technique. I've done similar pieces, taken the time to really explore and develop my technique, even like the shapes of these flowers and everything. I've already kind of developed my style and my technique for this. So it's really hard to give an answer because so much goes behind the actual hour that I'm actually creating this piece. Also, I did prepare the surface on this with collected collage papers and everything beforehand. I'm considering that as kind of an underpainting. The rules of the event are that you can have an underpainting, and so this collage surface I was counting as my underpainting in this piece. So that takes a little time to gather all of that. So this isn't a totally accurate representation of, that I can just whip out a piece every hour, but with some practice and development and kind of an idea of what I'm going to do, it is possible to get this done. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. I've got like about 15 minutes to go, and so at this point I have finished the negative spaces, and I'm just going in with some of my kind of background accents. I'm making another layer of the plant in this pot by creating some dark like back behind bits and pieces. I love doing still lifes because I can be pretty intuitive as I paint. I don't have to have a firm plan in mind. I'm not using a reference photo or doing any particular bouquet. It's more like creating the arrangement as I go, just kind of working on things like balance and contrast and shapes and the composition of it. So that's a fun process for me. As I add paint, I'm being careful to let some of that paper underneath peek through, because part of the richness comes from all those patterns and the paper underneath. So while I want to knock it down a bit so that you can see these pots a little more, I don't want to cover all of that interesting parts up. So I'm just kind of painting, doing a light coat of paint on top. I'm pulling out my Neo Art crayons. I really love these, or I shouldn't say crayons, they're wax oil pastels, and they're relatively new, and I am really have been enjoying them. They are light fast and are pretty nicely pigmented. They are firmer than an oil pastel, but maybe a little softer than like a colored pencil, and they're similar to the Neocolor ones. They're not water soluble, but I have been really enjoying them to add some texture and using them as especially finishing touches on artwork. So that's what I'm using here. I'm also using a different color of the Neo Art Pastel to add in some highlights here and there, just down to the final touches. I'm under 10 minutes here, and I'm just making the most of it and getting those last little touches that really give some pow to the piece. I'm down to the last 5 minutes, so I have to make my decisions kind of carefully. I want to be sure I get some shadows placed in here, so I'm making some little shadows under the pot, just kind of taking my last looks at my last chance to get little final touches in. So there's the piece complete. I condensed an hour of working into under 10 minutes in your time, and now I'm ready to get on to the next piece. So for this one, I've already done an underpainting on the panel. I'm using a Masonite panel with gesso and then a coat of I think this color of paint is one that I mixed up myself. It's almost like a fluorescent pinkish orange color. It's one of my favorite colors to use as an underpainting, especially on something like a floral piece like this will be. And this is one of my popular techniques, and so it's a little maybe funner for people to watch, a little more active, and I am finger painting a big portion of it. I've just real loosely made a sketch. I don't know if you can see it, but just the idea of where I have two vases, two pots on this still life, similar to the one that I just finished. Only my approach is much different in this, in that I am primarily adding paint on top of the underpainting. So I'm really establishing some flowers in here with this white paint, very showy on top of the underpainting, and just having fun getting those put in place. I kind of start this way because it kind of establishes my composition, and then I move on to, I've added to the white paint, I've added the yellow and the green also on here, and then I've done, similar to the previous piece, some negative painting to get that background in. So I've painted around some stems and the flowers, the finger painted flowers, and you can begin to see at this point what the piece is really going to look like. So here I am about halfway through the piece. I'm adding in some lighter and darker values to my background just to kind of give it a little more depth. Trying to be pretty loose with it still, not being too precise with mixing those colors. I want a more painterly look on this to kind of match the finger painted look. Once I'm happy with the background, then I'm moving on to getting that pot painted. I decided to go with a pretty dark color. This is kind of like a dark Payne's gray, like a navy blue with a little bit of green tinge to it, and it's one of my favorite colors to use in the place of black. Just the addition of this dark value really makes those light and bright flowers just really pop. So that's one of the reasons I chose a dark color, was to balance those out. And now I want to figure out what kind of design I want to put on the pot. I think maybe some kind of like a floral design, and again I want to keep pretty loose and painterly with this, but what kind of pot would I like to have is always what I think about on these. So again, it's just an imaginary design for this pot, but it just makes it a little more interesting than it would be as a plain solid colored pot. And then for some contrast, I decided to use some kind of mustardly yellow. It's the same color I used on the previous painting, so I still have it handy, and it's a color that I really like, so contrasts well with the blues in this piece and just adds a little variety. Once the pots are painted, I turn my attention to kind of the stems and twigs and whatever sticking out in this piece, and I'm using a colored pencil to kind of highlight those. They mostly exist at present by the negative painting, so what's showing through there is the underpainting. I like to always leave bits and pieces of the underpainting showing through. It helps kind of unify the piece as a whole, and just gives those little intriguing pops of color. Going back in with some white paint, and this time with my paintbrush, and kind of defining and touching up those finger painted flowers that I did at the very beginning. And being careful though to let some of that orange underpainting still peek through here and there. Where my first piece was a little more subtle, this piece really has a lot of contrast, and I'm getting kind of some folk art vibes. I feel like even though it's a vase of flowers, I get some kind of holiday feel in this, or some kind of Scandinavian, Norwegian something, folk art type feel vibes going on in this one. And so I'm just kind of leaning into that and embracing that as I finish this one up. I have under 10 minutes left now on this piece, so I'm getting down to my little final touches. I'm adding some scribbles with my pencil here and just kind of adding a little mark making texture interest to that. My final step is to add some Shading Gray High Flow by Golden here and there on the piece and water it down. And this just, again, adds a little more depth and interest to the piece. I simply dab it away where I don't want it and let it drip in there. It gives some kind of spontaneity to the piece, and part of the appeal of this whole process is not having absolute control and letting some serendipity happen here and there, giving a feeling of looseness to it. And I think this is just like a good towards the end of a piece. It's a technique I use pretty often. Going back with my pencil again, doing a little bit more of defining and touching up on here. This is something I can do even through the wet surface. And then with under 4 minutes left on my clock, I'm getting the piece dry so I can perhaps have time to add some touches. I'm working right down to the last second here with adding a little bit of touches with the red Neo Art pastel. Time's up, and here's that final piece.
Okay, so here's the finished results of those two speed paintings. These are available in my Etsy shop. This one is the Blue Pots. Very ingenious name there. And this one is Holiday Cheer. Kind of had a folk arty, the colors and the patterns and everything feel to it that makes me think of the holidays. So if you are interested in either of those will be available in my Etsy shop, and I'll have the link in the description below.
To finish up here, I'll just show you a few clips from the actual speed paint event. These pieces were auctioned off to go to the Alzheimer's Foundation, and I'd had a lot of fun there, and I was able to complete my piece. I was glad that I had practiced a little bit and had an idea. I went with this finger painted option. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.